What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review. It's our weekly show where we review the magic stories as they're posted on Wizard's website. And this week, we're reviewing Death's Precious Moments by Nikki Drayden. First of all, at the top, obviously a little bit different camera setup this time. Probably a lot worse. Apologies for that. We left the camera somewhere else, and we will work on getting that camera back shortly. It might not be next week. We will see. It's about a 2-hour drive away from our current location, which means it would be a 4-hour drive for us to go get it. So quick and dirty, we're using my laptop, which is just the best. It's just great. Don't worry about it. So apologies for some poor quality this time. If that is the case, hopefully it is still watchable and not too terrible for you. But my quick review at the top of this one, that aside, this story, in my opinion, and we'll get to Amy in just a second, but my opinion, this was one of the best. One of the best, if not the best, of these Guilds of Ravnica stories from Nikki Drayden so far, if not some of even the ones before that. That's just my personal opinion. Amy, your thoughts?
I mean, I do agree it was the best, but I kind of feel like it wasn't strikingly better.
Yeah, I think Amy and I talked about this beforehand, and I think it was like kind of far and away one of the best, and Amy was like, no, there are some that were close, which is fair. That's a fair assessment, and if you have comparing and contrasting opinions, feel free to leave them in the comments as always. But so that's the quick review at the beginning. It's really just to let you all know, if you have not gone and read the story, we highly recommend it. Regardless of, the slight difference between our two opinions, we do highly recommend it. So if you have not gotten a chance to read the story yet, and maybe you don't know where to find it, the link is down in the description box below. So feel free to go on down there, click that, go read the story, and then come back here. Because here on JaAR, as we always say, we review, we do not summarize.
Yes.
So
we always ask you to read the story first if you're going to watch our video.
Yes, and then come back here and join in the discussion. Give us your opinions, compare them and contrast them with ours, like I said. So, on to the full review itself. This story had so much going for it.
Yeah.
And I started reading this story. I'm going to cough real bad. Excuse me. Wow. I started reading this story like I've read all of the other Guilds of Ravnica stories, where I was trying to learn about this new character, right? All of the characters, not all the characters in this story, but I go in expecting all of the characters that we're going to meet from the start of the story until the end to be new characters whom we have never met before, which means that the story needs to tell us all we need to know about their personalities. In this story, we had like Mazarek and Vraska technically in there at one point. And so we know those two, but everyone else that we met were brand new characters. Yeah. And again, it's been that way for all of Nikki Drayden's stories, that there might be that one character in there who we have some inkling of who they are from like a card or something like that, or actually from the stories themselves. But this one, our main character for this one was Bozak. Who was a Crawl, whom we have seen, we saw the Crawl in Pride of the Crawl by Alison Lures. We have talked about that story many times because it was fantastic. One of the Commander stories that was written for Commander all those months ago. It wasn't really years, plural, but it was a good one. It was a very, very good story. And
it was a while ago.
Yes, and it was among the, month and a half of Alison stories. Before they kind of moved over to saying that it was the narrative team, so that, it wasn't just Alison, despite the fact that, as we've said, she did an amazing job with all of those, despite the fact that she was working, seemingly tirelessly on it.
Right.
She just did such an amazing job. But with this one, we kind of get more of a payoff for the Mazarek story. And we get to learn more about the Crawl. We get to meet a generic Crawl, which, to be fair, is what we've come to expect from these stories, is that the overall of the Boros, and the overall of the Dimir and the Golgari and etc. But now you get to meet a gal or a dude or a living entity, and you get to just see them in their daily lives. Now, their daily lives are not like our daily lives, although arguably they are, right? We made the comparison to hashtag millennial problems a few weeks ago with one of the stories, because it was like, I can't afford to do this, and it, with the is it stories.
Right.
The Is It story that we read, where it was like, you know, I can't afford this and they want me to work for this, but I don't. And in this one, it's somewhat similar in that you had a Crawl who seemed to be like someone living in a rural environment, right? Who lives with their siblings and works in the area around their home and then travels back to their home, but hears about a prospect in the Undercity, right? Replace the word under with big, and it's really any story about someone moving from a rural place to an urban environment and trying to fit in. And I appreciated that. I thought that was great because it's a good hook that is relatable from pop culture and real life,
I
right?
was
Some
gonna say,
some people just do
I don't
that.
know about pop
Yeah.
culture so much as just, reality.
Yeah, and some people do genuinely do that, and sometimes, you know, you take a country kid and put him in the city, and they have some growing pains. And this didn't emphasize that as much. I mean, it talked about it a little bit, but not as much as you might expect.
Hijinks.
Yeah, right, exactly. And instead, it kind of combined it with the trope of, you know, complete this competition, and you get this prize that
Right.
would help you fulfill your dream. And amazingly, the themes in this story worked super well also to blend in with those tropes, if you want to call them that, because you had themes of disability with the malformed wing, and the fact that that disability didn't define who Bozak was, but it still somewhat impacted his life and his actions, but he was still able to adapt in his world with his disability. I don't know how much that stood out a lot for me. I don't know if it keyed in as much with you.
I don't know. I feel like there were a lot of mentions of it. And I feel like perhaps if we were seeing a true cross-section of this person's life, in real life versus them being a story character with a disability, I think we would hear less of that.
Right. It did, right. I think it needed to be there to impact where it needed to impact, but I feel like it wasn't like, oh, well, I can't do it because of my wing, which I feel like would be, I don't want to say disingenuous, because there are plenty of things that a person with certain disabilities just is not able to do, and that may be depressing for that person, that it might be difficult, but that wasn't the driving force behind his motivation for doing this. It was simply, this is what I want to do. And the disability may have gotten in the way in certain situations, but again, he adapted and worked around it. It was not, how will I do this? I'm disabled, and then trying to get over it, which, again.
Right, but to me, it felt like a story about a guy who's disabled more than it felt like the life of a guy who's disabled.
Interesting. Okay. That's fair.
Because I feel like in a story, it gets talked about more than it would on a regular basis in real life for story purposes, because you need to understand a level of it in order for it to make sense in the story.
Right.
Versus like if you were watching a reality show about somebody who is disabled, and then you just kind of are kind of more shown instead of told how it affects them.
Right. You would see their day to day. And I mean, presumably if it was about someone who is disabled, they would tell you like, okay, and now I have to do this, which for a normal person would be easy, but for me, I have to do X, Y, and Z to make it attainable for me with my disability, which again, that's a kind of a different story. The other theme that was in here, whether you want to have noticed it or not, was racism.
Yeah.
And it didn't beat you over the head with it, but it was obvious, and it was the kind of thing where you were like, oh man, that sucks. Because with this contest, with the Lich presenting the contest to everyone, Bozak wins. For all intents and purposes, Bozak wins the contest. But an elf comes in second after cheating to win. But to be fair, there were no rules, so it's not technically cheating because you didn't break any rules to do it. He just didn't gather the mushrooms himself. But the Lich lays out the rules, and even though Bozak wins, and there's supposed to be one winner, the Lich says, congratulations, you've won. And then the elf gets there, and Bozak and the Lich says, congratulations, you've also won. And Bozak's like, wait a minute, but there was only supposed to be one winner. But I'm not going to tell him because he's a Lich, and he's just going to tell me that I need to leave now. And then when we cut ahead to Bozak doing the job that he wanted to go for, we then find that he gets the crappy jobs, consistently gets the crappy jobs. And Zegadonis, who is the elf, gets the better jobs and is the Lich's right-hand man, person, whatever. And it's, again, I don't know, maybe am I wrong in saying it didn't beat us over the head with it? Because it was so obvious. It didn't use the word racism, and right, and it didn't. And Bozak never said that he felt like discriminated against or whatever. But again, and take this where it comes, right? We are a show done by a man and a woman, but we are also both obviously white, and so be aware of our bias or our privilege or our lack of knowledge where it comes from. But I can imagine that there are people out there who are just so used to it and have been beaten down by the bias and the discrimination so much that it's not even worth it to them to say, hey, that's not fair. They just have to kind of roll with it, unfortunately. And so again, take that from where it comes. If I'm wrong and you have experience and you wish to share that, please feel free.
Please do.
But that's kind of how I read it, again, as somebody from the outside. And I still appreciated it. I appreciated that it was there. I appreciated that the themes were approached. And I'm also aware that Nikki Drayden is a woman of color. And so would seemingly have the background and the experience to understand that. Hopefully not heavily, but we don't know. I don't know her background personally. But I liked that theme was put in there because in stories like this, to shy away from that kind of stuff doesn't make sense. Especially with the Crawl, who are considered lesser by the rest of the Golgari swarm. And he even says at one point, Bozak even kind of internally says, when he saves those people's lives from the wood wraiths, he says, that there were other Gorgons and they kind of left. And he said they're probably not used to being outnumbered because there were 2 Crawl. And so, and so there were Gorgons and elves, but there were also 2 Crawl. And that's not something that the other races of the Golgari seem to be used to, is actually seeming to be on par with these, what they would consider to be lesser.
Good point.
Right. And so, and that was just a touch, right? That was the kind of thing where it was like, oh, okay, that's cool. But then once they got to actually getting back around to the Lich again, the elf Lich, and, then it was a little bit more blatant. Like I said, I didn't feel like it beat me over the head, but maybe that is incorrect, and maybe you disagree. And as always, let us know.
I think that aspect, I would say it doesn't beat us over the head with it, but I think that was kind of one of the aspects that made me like this story.
Okay.
It had a realism to it that I think the other stories were lacking. Yet it was still very creative like the other stories were.
Yeah.
And had, interesting, flavorful stuff.
Yeah. Well, and we'll get to the thing at the end that was why I loved this story so much. Not to discount the the disability representation as well as the racism commentary. Those stood out to me, and I really appreciated seeing that. But there was more, and like I said, I'll get to that at the end. I do want to point out, though, the moment that had me roaring with laughter was we had possibly one of the best origin stories of a main character ever in the Magic stories that I've ever read. It was so good. It grossed you out big time, but it was so good. Just the story of Bozak mentioning that, you know, he and his siblings were born, and when they were born, they started eating the guts of their mother, and they lived inside of their mother while they grew, and the mother defended them against predators with her mandibles or her claws or whatever. And then when they grew big enough and the cocoons went away, then they consumed the rest of her and just lived inside of her carapace and made little homes for themselves. That was disgusting, but so perfect for Golgari, so perfect for the crawl in general. It was like, it just dripped with flavor. I loved every second of reading that. And then to find out later, because I wrote it in my notes, Bozak talked a lot about his mother. A lot. He was like, I love my mother. And then like later on, the mother thing comes up, and he's like, just like when I lived with my mother, she was the best, and I love her, and she protected me. It was like, that is not warranted for you to be talking this much about your mother again. But the first time he brought it up was with his sibling. And he's like, you know, and mother protects us, and we are here, and she is keeping us safe. And to then find out that the thing that he calls his mother is not his mother like we understand mothers. It is the beetle that his mother laid eggs upon, and then they used as a host body. I wrote symbiotic originally. That is not a symbiotic relationship at all.
No, it's a
parasite host, absolutely.
Relationship.
Because at first I wrote it, I was like, oh, a symbiotic relationship, I get it. No, I was so wrong. It's like, oh, we ate her guts, and then she saved us, and then we ate the rest of her and lived inside of her dead body. And Bozak used one of her legs to make his staff. Like, yeah. All of that. So cool and so flavorful. And so the concept of the Golgari of death is not the end, which comes at the end, ironically, of this story as well. The
thing I didn't like about that is that it was, I don't know, it felt disrespectful to sit there and say, well, I ate my mother alive, but I loved her. You know, everybody's got problems,
but
right?
But you have to understand. I think that's not fair, Minnie. You have to understand. The thing that I took away from that is that that's how they think.
Well, I'm not
they
saying
were raised that way.
No, I'm not saying it's not. You know, and that is certainly a good way of, you know, getting into the audience's head and making them realize like how different from us the Golgari really are in terms of the way that they think.
Yep.
But yeah, I didn't appreciate it.
Interesting.
At all.
Okay. That's fair. And let us know. I loved it. I thought it was perfect. I thought it was, like I said, I thought it was super flavorful. And
it might be amazingly flavorful. And it might be exactly what we need to help us learn about the Golgari and their culture. Mm-hmm. But it just, it's, to me, it feels so like dehumanizing for those characters.
Okay.
You know, and they are insects.
Yes.
You know, so
that's why I
guess
sideways,
that's why they're trying to do that. But
they are also personified in that they are anthropomorphic and they speak and have personality and feelings and etc. So, so that's a fair point, I guess.
So it just, I don't know. I feel like it kind of takes away from our ability to understand them being, you know, good guys. Okay.
Interesting. An interesting point. I hear your points. I don't fully buy them, but I'm curious to hear other people's thoughts on it as well. And I think that the last thing that I wanted to talk about was what I originally, again, writing things down originally and then what they come to be later. I wrote down to talk about foreshadowing a bit.
Okay.
And I think that this story took the concept of foreshadowing and flirted with it and then went so far beyond it that it was callbacks at that point. It was a little bit of foreshadowing and then it was just callback after callback after callback, which is not a complaint. That is the thing that I loved the most, was that I talk a lot and maybe I talk about it too much.
I mean, you talk a lot.
Wow. That's true. I do talk a lot.
Yeah.
The thing that I talk about frequently, I feel like on this show, like I said, maybe too much, is the concept of, I forget the name of the principle. I relearned this recently, but it's the principle of, if you have a gun in Act 1, it better go off in Act 3. Which really, because otherwise what was the point of us as the reader or the audience seeing or hearing about that gun? There was no purpose behind it. And so, in other words, there needs to be a payoff. And so anytime there's something in one of these, I mean, they're short stories. Anytime there's something in one of these short stories, I'm like hyper aware of that thing. And I try to keep track of when we get the payoff for learning about that thing or that person.
Okay.
And so, but I feel like in this story, we learned about the thing or the person. We got the payoff for the thing or the person. And then we got swerved in the best way by hearing about it again at the end.
Right.
And I loved that. I thought that was great because you throw curveballs at people, right? It was predictable that Bozak was going to win that contest. It wasn't necessarily predictable that he was going to be joined by somebody else, but you knew he was going to win because it wasn't like, oh, I got betrayed and now I have to go home, I guess. Right. End of story, right? Clearly there was going to be more to it than that. So that much was predictable. What was not predictable was we learned about Zegadonis. And we were introduced to Zegadonis when he runs by and bumps into Bozak and kind of mouths off to him and then runs off. And then when we meet, I wrote this down, Lemon. When we meet Lemon later, who Bozak kind of teams up with to try to complete this task or this quest, when he meets up with him, Lemon says, well, the only person who we really had to worry about was Zegadonis, and he's dead now from that attack. That, to me, was the payoff. It was, hey, we met this guy. He got his comeuppance for being such a jerk by dying in a pretty
gruesome way.
Yeah, but an anticlimactic way for someone who was supposed to be the biggest threat, according to Lemon. And so, to me, that was it. He was done, and it was like, well, that's what he gets for being a jerk.
Yeah.
Right? He dies that way. In that anticlimactic way for him as a character. And then he pops back up at the end as a shocker and hits Lemon. He doesn't kill him, but he like breaks one of his legs or whatever and takes the satchel and is running, but he's limping because he's hurt. And so that's how, even though being disabled, that's how Bozak gets there first and Zegadonis gets there second, although Zegadonis does get to actually join. But again, that was the first. That was the first of many. Because, and I don't know, what did you think at that point when Zegadonis came back?
I was like, oh, okay. I was surprised, but I think I was only surprised because I felt like there was so much story in there.
Okay.
And I feel like if there had been less story in that interim,
in between, okay,
I would have not been as surprised that he came back. I would have been like, oh yeah, of course. You know,
oh, this guy again, right? Okay.
Like, oh, of course the bad guys arrived to the attack or whatever, and now he's coming back to try and steal it away from the hero,
right?
But
that last gasp. Where you think you've got it and you still have to.
Right. But just because there was so much more meat to the story in
Yep.
between those two parts,
Yep.
it made me really surprised when that happened, because I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Because we were just, there was just so much other stuff that we were thinking about at that moment. And then to, spin us and face us the other direction all of a sudden.
And not only that, but I mean, on to the next thing that was a callback, because again, it was not foreshadowing, in my opinion. I thought it was more of a callback at that point. But the other thing was the zombie fungus. Mm-hmm. We hear about the dangers of these fungi. And that, Bozak says, I'm going to put like 2 drops of the elixir to double coat it just to be safe. And the Lich is like, be careful when you go out there. If you die, realize that you go to fuel the rest of the Golgari, so you're still helping, but, be aware. And Bozak says, like, these are the most dangerous mushrooms. And so we hear about that. We learn about the thing, right? Like I said, we learn about the thing. And then the payoff for the thing is that one guy falls. And he lands on his satchel and he breaks the zombie fungus. And the spores are going up towards his face. And we hear about that the spores are going up towards his face. And in going up towards his face, they get there, and he just stands up, and he looks up, and he sees a tall tree. He asks which one they think is the tallest, and he just climbs the tree, latches onto the top of it, and from what we're told, mushrooms are going to sprout out of his face. They're going to sprout out of his ears and eyes and mouth, and he's just going to live there, and those mushrooms are then going to drop their spores down throughout everybody underneath at that point to infect further of them. That's amazing.
Right.
And
so
I thought...
flavorful,
yes,
so fun.
Yes, and I thought that was an amazing payoff for the thing that we learned about. And then it comes up in the end, where Bozak has to use one of those to get himself to climb.
Yeah,
because
and that
he can't
takes
fly.
it to a whole nother level.
It was amazing.
Because no one understands what these mushrooms do quite like he does.
True.
Right?
Hence why he won.
And then, he's like, well, I have to eat one of these.
Yeah, I have to warn Veraska.
So that I can protect the leader of our
Guild.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to the point where, because that's the thing that was beneficial and something that people might have missed if they didn't read the Pride of the Crawl story, is that Mazarek is so close to Veraska friendship, like in friendship, that the Crawl have to be loyal to Veraska. Not like it's required, but like that's what they're going to do, as opposed to being loyal to Gerard or Izoni, for example, from learning from Guilds of Ravnica, where that kind of contrast lies. Because, again, the Lich here is trying to get the Boros to arrest Veraska for the Tin Street Massacre.
Right.
And Bozak being...
framing her.
Yes, and Bozak being the only one who knows that she's about to be framed, knows that he has to stop it. He has to warn her, and he has to... And so he abandons his post. Makes perfect sense. He's the hero, right? And realizes, sacrifices himself.
Yeah. Basically.
To accomplish this task that he feels that he needs to accomplish.
Which is perfectly Golgari.
Yes. And because, again, we then find out at the end, spoilers, we then find out at the end that he dies. And Mazarek, which I don't know that I knew, or I don't know that I remembered that Mazarek could do necromancy, but Mazarek is the one who resurrects... Yeah, I did that on purpose. That Mazarek is the one who resurrects or zombifies Bozak. Okay. Yeah, I guess. Zombifies Bozak and brings him back as a way to further his purpose, right? And I think I would have appreciated a little bit more, well, maybe he doesn't know, but I think I would have appreciated a little bit more appreciation from Mazarek to Bozak, although I guess at that point Bozak is just a tool now. Right. So maybe not. Maybe it's not like, you did a great job, thanks.
Yeah.
It's just, you work for me, I've done this before, so let's just do it, And it's kind of matter of fact, the same way that Bozak being in charge of the zombie that he was not super thrilled with, also worked. So who knows? Maybe that was why.
Well, I feel like too that kind of proves that Mazarek is like the bad guy, and Bozak is the good guy, because
Okay.
because he's willing to sacrifice himself to protect Veraska, to protect his guild, so he has like a patriotism, right? And then, and he kind of gives it up and then learns that like he's kind of giving that to Mazarek, and he's okay with it.
Oh, he's super happy.
Even though like he basically also learned from that that Mazarek doesn't. He learned from his whole life basically that Mazarek doesn't deserve to have his help. But he's willing to help out his guild to the point where he'll be Mazarek's slave basically. Because he's still like, even though he's dead, he's still conscious enough.
Oh yeah.
To know that he's just, at his beck and call now.
He can't control himself seemingly,
Right.
but he's aware enough. Yes. Yeah. And I don't know. I thought, you know what? I am a man who appreciates wordplay. If you didn't get that from the Mazarek resurrect thing earlier, I appreciate it. And I think Nikki does a really good job of it in her stories. And I've mentioned this in the past, but I didn't have specific examples. I just had like the concept of like when she's talking about something, she tends to use adjectives that coincide with what's going on in the story. And I noticed that and I appreciate that. This time when there was one, I noted it down. And it's not as good of an example as some of the past ones that, I didn't recall.
I feel like the past ones kind of really had that as an apparent device that she used.
Yes.
And I don't feel like it was apparent in this story for me.
Right. The only ones to me, first of all, the main one at the end, which is why I bring it up now, because this is what we were talking about, where Bozak says, I have my whole death ahead of me.
Right.
That I love. I loved it. It was great. But earlier on in the story as well, we hear that one moment where he uses his staff to kill Kata. Now, Kata, being the Gorgon during the contest, was trying to turn him to stone. And he excuse me, again, Jesus. He uses his staff to stab her in the chest and kill her.
Yeah.
Again, self-defense, whatever. Doesn't matter. He doesn't care. He doesn't care, and it doesn't matter. But he stabs her in the chest to not be turned to stone. And in doing so, he says that now, having killed her, it spears him on.
Nice. Yeah, I didn't notice that.
Yeah. And again,
I think because I hate puns.
And she picked the right guy then.
Yeah.
So...
I mean, I did pick the right guy, but...
Not if you don't like
it's
puns.
Unfortunate.
Yeah, it is. It's very unfortunate.
How much he likes puns.
So, but that was, again, those were most, I would say, because I didn't write down a ton of other things. But those are the reasons why I thought that this story was one of the best, the best. I think it was the best of the Guilds of Ravnica ones. If I go back a few weeks before the Guilds of Ravnica stories, in some of the other stories, mainline stories that we reviewed, I think that they were better than some of those as well. Of course, that 2019 was damn good though, so it would probably be a little tough. But yeah, I think it was better than some of those as well. And so, yeah, that's this one. I
think all of Nikki's stories were very creative, very flavorful, very interesting in their own way. But I do feel like this one had a realism that the other ones did not have, and therefore it was better than the rest.
Oh yeah, and we'll talk about this in a second. But we weren't here last week. But 2 weeks ago, when we did the Is It based story, we said that it was the worst of the three in our opinion, but that did not mean it was bad. It just was the worst of the three. And so it was nice to go from what we thought was the worst of the three, again, still not bad, but the worst of the three, to the best of the four.
Right.
So it was a nice move to go from 2 solid stories to one that dipped a little and then to one that just shot right back up again. I appreciated that. I liked that a lot.
I also like the variety in these stories. I think I want to say, and I'm a little reluctant to, because I don't know that I'm getting this right, but
Okay.
I want to say that of the stories that are written by the same author, these had a variance to them
Yep.
that other ones did not. You know, I can't remember a writer that had quite as much variance to, I don't know, just everything. Like all the literary devices that we talk about on this show, all of the you know, just like her style.
Yeah.
Her style had a variance to it. It's almost like each story had its own style, and that's perfect because it's so indicative of the guilds. You know, that each guild has its own style and its own mood and its own culture, and there's no better way to show that than to literally change your style from one story to the next when referring to different guilds.
Yeah.
And so I think that was done very artfully, regardless of whether the actual details in the story did that or not.
Right.
Because I do feel like there are certain stories where there was a bit of a disconnect there. But I think like in a much more broad, like big picture kind of way, that these stories were very sort of successful in the method that they tried to convey the differences between the guilds.
Right. And I think, because I agree with you, I think that some writers have a typical structure that they follow with their stories, which is, there's nothing wrong with that at all. If that is where they find their success, more power to them. And who the hell am I to tell them to not? But I think with Nikki, that structure is a lot more skeletal. And so it gives her the opportunity to go in so many different directions with it and change up her style, like Amy was saying.
And yet there's still that through line that allows you to realize it's by the same author.
Yep. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, you can see the skeletal structure. Now, having read 4 of them, I think once I had gotten to the 3rd one, I could notice the little beats here and there where I was like, oh, okay, yep, that's Nikki.
And it's
right?
the stuff you mentioned. You know, it's those puns. It's those the sort of deep, rich, dripping flavor that she gives. To each guild. And you know, it's all the things that we mentioned already.
Yeah.
But it also, she also did an amazing job of differentiating those guilds.
Oh yeah. And
in a way that I feel like other authors might have fallen short trying to do. I feel like she was able to accomplish that in an unexpected way.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, and don't mistake it. We have one more story to go next week. Next week we have Selesnya, which I would say, in my opinion, based on the first, even before this week, based on the first 3, and now even this one, Selesnya is the guild that we have heard the least about. You know, with the Demir or with the other stories, there was Demir sprinkled in there, and Golgari, and Izzet. I mean, even sometimes Rakdos and things like that. But Selesnya, I think we've heard the least about of the 5 from Guilds of Ravnica. And I mean, it makes sense, right? They're in their own conclave, off doing their own thing. But so it'll be interesting to see what happens next week and how different tonally it will be, because we're dealing with such different people. And so that should be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, from the Golgari. I mean, I feel like you couldn't have something more different, which is funny because
Yeah.
they're both green.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like completely different.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
Just in terms of the things that I mentioned before, like the culture, just, yeah.
And
It'll just be so different, and I think it'll be really interesting to see that contrast.
Right.
To have those two next to each other will be cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so we will get to see that through line between this week and next week, and we'll talk about that next week as well, where, like I said, unfortunately, we may still be with this camera setup. We will have to see.
Yeah, sorry, guys.
Apologies. We'll see what we can do, because we might be able to get it mailed to us or something. But regardless...
It's really weird sitting on this side, even.
yeah, we had to switch sides for other different reasons, but regardless... And last week, we had a little bit of a wrench thrown into things because there was no story.
Yeah.
And we're not going to get into this conversation again, but you can feel free to go watch our communication video that we made.
Yeah.
Please feel free, because that was a thing that was upsetting. And so, but to thank
Leave
all
your
of
comments and opinions, because it makes us feel better to feel like we're not just out in an ocean floating forever.
But
doggy paddling for life.
And so to apologize, I mean, to be completely frank, there was nothing that we could have pulled together at the last minute.
Right.
That would have been worthy of a JaAR. And so
we were so unaware of the fact that there wasn't going to be a story.
And we weren't the only ones. But there will be one next week, because in 2 weeks, I assume that they wouldn't put out a story the day before what is the United States' Thanksgiving.
Right. So
I assume that we will not have a story in 2 weeks, but because the last story is next week, that makes sense to me. And we'll talk next week about what we're going to do with that. But this past week, what we did, instead of putting out a JaAR, was we gave you a bonus video. And it was me cube drafting. And I am not good at cube. Ooh, boy, am I not good at cube. But it was MTGO Cube. It was an old cube draft that I filmed a while ago, but that I had saved up in case we needed a video, and we did.
And thank God we had it.
Yes, well, and we have other videos as well. In fact, this past Saturday, we put out another one to continue to apologize, even though it was very much not our fault. But we put out another video to continue to apologize, which was me opening a Dominaria pre-release pack, because I have more of those that I have opened and you have not seen yet, and I tried to build a deck out of it. Again, I'm not good at deck building either. Ooh, boy. But, and in fact, we had a comment on that video of a viewer telling me a much better idea for my deck, and it was just something that I did not see. So thank you if you're watching this, if you've gotten this far into this video as well.
Leave your comments, guys. We do read them.
Yes, you're a very loyal Geek for All follower. But otherwise, regardless, we will be back next week with another episode of JaAR here on Geek for All. For this episode, I want to thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. Let us know any and all thoughts in the comments down below. That has been, with last week and with this week, with the camera setup and the weird stuff going on behind the scenes that you can't see. Yes.
Just a lot.
If you ever questioned whether or not Amy and I have
Vorthos pride.
I was like, I know I kind of sprung it on you, but I felt like I made it grandiose enough. Okay, yes, show off your hashtag Vorthos pride along with us. If we did this much, thank you guys so much for joining in with us despite everything.
An interesting setup going on here just to make this video happen.
Yeah,
so
it's real bad,
it's a good thing it's out of frame and you can't tell.
It's real bad. Real bad. I don't like it at all. And again, I mean, the camera's all tilted and everything.
Yeah.
So anyway,
not great.
Apologies for that again. But like I said, there will be videos popping up on the screen. Feel free to click them. You guys know what to do with YouTube. There's a subscribe button. It's going to be over there by the Thopter, as always. We've also been putting out some MTG Arena content.
Yes.
That is tutorial
Please
videos.
Check that out.
It's Amy's first foray it's both of ours first foray into MTG Arena, but it's one of Amy's first forays into Magic in general. And so if you know somebody who does not really know how to play Magic and they don't want to download MTG Arena and play through the client, the videos are like 10 minutes long each. They're really not that long. If you like them, let us know. If you share them around. That would help us out quite a bit.
Right.
Maybe there's a lot of videos that I wanted to link, so we'll see which ones I actually put up. Who knows? But thank you guys so much for watching once again. Like I said, this has been another episode of JaAR here on Geek for All. I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, guys, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.